A visionary, a perfectionist, a filmmaker whose gaze stretched beyond the stars and into the darkest corners of the human mind. This is the story of Stanley Kubrick, a man who defied convention and forever altered cinema. Stanley Kubrick was born on July 26, 1928, in the Bronx. From a young age, he saw the world differently. A curious child with a mind that refused to settle within the lines.
Today, a lot of people that have kids that are that far apart, they encourage the older one to nurture the younger one as a baby, and so they sort of get to love them. But I gather Stanley was very jealous, that I was there. He was very good, though. He was very good to me. He wasn't like your typical boy. He read a lot. He always had a book. Well, my mother read all the time. She always was behind him, always, and she really believed it. She says, there's nothing you can't do. She always was supportive of him. She was really a great mother, I think.
At 13, he was given a camera by his father, a gift that would change the course of his life.
Stanley was really quite involved, quite passionate about photography. Now, Stanley, you must understand, was, by the general lights of the time, the son of a wealthy person, as they had their own home. And they could have a dark room. And his father was interested in photography, and I think he encouraged Stanley to use the dark room and to become a photographer. That darkroom background actually was one of the bedrock things that enabled him to develop a very high level of sophistication about photography and then finally cinematography.
Photography became Stanley's first obsession, a way to freeze time, to capture moments that others overlooked. By 17, he was working as a photographer for Look magazine. His images had a cinematic quality, a sense of mystery that hinted at the filmmaker he would one day become. In 1950, Kubrick took his first steps into filmmaking. His early works were self-financed, small projects that allowed him to experiment and find his voice.
Day of the Fight was Stanley's first effort at filmmaking. I was his assistant on that, and I'm very proud of the fact that I operated the second camera during the final fight sequence, which is a real fight. I was shooting when he was loading. I got the knockdown because Stanley was loading.
Fear and Desire, Killer's Kiss, and The Killing. These early films, though rough, displayed Kubrick's unmistakable style, his obsession with detail, his fascination with human nature, and his relentless pursuit of perfection.
He was not a bohemian. He was not an avant-garde left bank figure. He was a kid from the Bronx who was smart. I don't think he had too much education. He was a very good chess player. It's the intensity impressed me. I thought he had a vision of someplace he was going.
Hollywood noticed, and soon Kubrick found himself with bigger budgets and bigger stars. But he was not interested in simply making movies. He wanted to redefine them.
Walked in the middle, as we usually did when we were kids, in the middle of a movie, Paths of Glory. Myself and my friends who were kind of war film buffs, we had never seen anything quite like it. We never seen anything quite like the tone of it. We had seen other anti-war films, but this one was so honest, particularly the trial scene and the scenes between MacReady and Kirk Douglas.
I ordered an attack. Your troops refused to attack.
Our troops did attack, sir, but they could make no headway.
Because they didn't try, Colonel. I saw it myself.
It was so honest that it was shocking. You know, made it even more shocking was the nature of the way it was shot. The use of the tracking camera in the trenches.
With Paths of Glory and Spartacus and Lolita, Kubrick began his ascent. But it was the films that followed that would cement his status as a legend.
Now then, Dmitri, you know how we've always talked about the possibility of something going wrong with the bomb. The bomb, Dmitri. The hydrogen bomb.
In Dr. Strangelove, Kubrick found humor in the darkest corners of human nature. Through satire and absurdity, he exposed the madness of war, the fragility of peace, and the terrifying ease with which humanity could destroy itself.
Everything wonderful about that movie is because of the way it was directed. Otherwise, I thought there were flaws in the writing of the movie and flaws in some of the performances in the movie, but the directing of the movie was so bravura and so superb, you know, it was just a knockout.
When did you first develop this theory?
I first became aware of it, Mandrake, during the physical act of love. Luckily, I was able to interpret these feelings correctly.
Yes.
The film struck a nerve, resonating with audiences and critics alike. Dr. Strangelove became an unexpected success, praised for its daring satire and its fearless critique of Cold War tensions. Kubrick had transformed nuclear anxiety into dark comedy, creating one of the most iconic and influential films of its era. With 2001, A Space Odyssey, Kubrick reached beyond the stars. He dared to ask the fundamental questions of existence, presenting a visual poem that transcended the boundaries of science fiction.
Despite your enormous intellect, are you ever frustrated by your dependence on people to carry out action?
Not in the slightest bit. I enjoy working with people.
I just remember going to the theater and seeing the picture for the first time, feeling that it wasn't a movie. It was the first time that the motion picture form had been changed. It wasn't a documentary, and it wasn't a drama, and it wasn't really science fiction. It was more science eventuality.
2001 was not just a film. It was a voyage into the unknown, a meditation on human evolution, technology, and what it means to reach beyond our own understanding.
18 months ago, the first evidence of intelligent life off the Earth was discovered. It was buried 40 feet below the lunar surface, near the crater Tycho.
Well, I first saw 2001 as a child, 7 years old, and they re-released 2001 in the wake of the tremendous success of Star Wars. My relationship with the film has evolved, but I think that first response is in many ways, I think, the truest response to 2001. I think it is primarily an emotional experience. It's something you feel. Like all great works of science fiction, and I think 2001 is perhaps the greatest. The film has never failed to be massively relevant in a cinematic sense and in a storytelling sense, but its technological relevance has sort of ebbed and flowed over the years, depending on what's going on in our world.
Defying all expectations, 2001 A Space Odyssey became a landmark achievement in cinema, revolutionizing science fiction and leaving audiences in awe of its profound, visionary storytelling. For his groundbreaking work on 2001, Kubrick received his first and only Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, an acknowledgement of the director's unmatched creativity and innovation. In A Clockwork Orange, Kubrick explored the thin line between free will and societal control. Alex, both villain and victim, is forced to confront his own nature in a dystopian world devoid of true morality.
Saying to him once, well, look, Stanley, look, how do you direct? I mean, what's your style? He said, I really don't know. I never know what I want, but I do know what I don't want. I don't think I've really ever had that much fun on a job. I mean, I've worked with other great directors, and actually the actual fun of doing the work, which was, of course, in the character of Alex, too. He was a wicked son of a bitch. That I think Stanley and I had in common is a wicked sense of humor.
He was a bolshy, great, burly bastard, but he was very fond of myself, me being very young. I didn't so much like the latter part of the book, which is more like all preachy talking than fighting in the old inn-out. And then drink their Hebrew vino and getting onto the bed with their wives' handmaidens.
Clockwork Orange was, I think, the first punk rock movie ever made. It was a very bleak vision of a dangerous future where young people, teenagers, are free to roam the streets without any kind of parental exception. And they break into homes and they assault and rape people. That the subject matter was dangerous. But Kubrick had a kind of twinkle in his eye, especially the scene where you hear Gene Kelly singing in the rain when he's basically kicking a man practically to death. And that was one of the most horrifying things I think I've ever witnessed. Just a counterpoint of the music and the song and kicking him every time the music commanded it. And that was audacious and I think very dangerous in its time. But when you look at the movie right now, unfortunately, history has caught up to the movie. And the headlines we now live with every day in our lives are not dissimilar to some of the subject matter of this 1960s film, Clockwork Orange.
The film ignited controversy for its explicit violence and bleak portrayal of society. A Clockwork Orange polarized audiences facing censorship and bans. Yet it became a critical success for its daring narrative and thought-provoking questions on human nature. In Barry Lyndon, Kubrick turned his lens to the 18th century, crafting a visual masterpiece that captured beauty, ambition, and the inevitable decay of human aspirations.
He was a perfectionist. And with Barry Lyndon, you had to have that perfection.
He had every art book, every book on paintings and landscapes and history and clothes and details down to playing cards. And he knew his subject.
The biggest problem was filming with candlelight. That was a key part of creating the atmosphere and the look of that period.
What are the odds, gentlemen, that I live to see Mr. Barry hang yet?
He was a photographer. First and foremost, he loved to make pretty pictures, and he got very excited about that.
When Stanley read in the American Cinematographer about a lens that NASA used and was made by Zeiss, he was incredibly excited. His very, very fast lens allowed him to light a set with candlelight.
That was revolutionary, I think, definitely. But that was typical Stanley of getting those lenses, getting Ed DiGiulio to put them on a BNC camera. That's the sort of thing that Stanley was very, very clever at.
Despite mixed reviews and initial box office disappointment, Barry Lyndon was later celebrated as a technical marvel. Shot with natural lighting, the film was like a moving painting, each frame meticulously composed. Kubrick had created a tragic tale of hubris wrapped in elegance, and over time, it achieved cult status among critics and cinephiles alike.
Stanley was really emotionally hurt. He said to me, he said, what do people want from a movie? I mean, he just didn't understand it, you know, because a lot of it was kind of thoughtless criticism, but it's a radically different feeling about the film now.
He was very, very, very sad and disheartened that particularly smaller television stations and smaller papers did not at all appreciate the tremendous effort that went into these films and just simply dismissed it.
Do you know what kind of a camera that is? What it's called?
It's a home movie.
Our Reflect, it's called.
For all his public intensity, Stanley Kubrick was a deeply private man. Behind the camera, he was known as an exacting artist, a perfectionist with an insatiable drive to create. But this relentless pursuit came at a cost.
I watched the video of me as a very fresh 10-year-old, being very fresh to him, but also him being bossy and too impatient and putting his director's hat on in an inappropriate way.
On you, get him off. We're shooting. Grab him and get him off.
I'm sure you're not supposed to talk to me like this.
Do you often find me in a temper?
Yes.
Oh, I don't believe that. I can't believe that.
Well, you better believe it because you just went in a temper a couple minutes ago. Can't play like that.
I think I'm one of the most even-tempered people you'll ever meet.
Kubrick's first 2 marriages ended in divorce, a reflection of his struggle to balance his life behind the lens with the relationships that anchored him. Though Kubrick's intensity often kept him distant, his family remained the quiet foundation behind his relentless pursuit of perfection. Yet, as with so many great artists, the very drive that fueled his genius also complicated his closest connections. After the commercial failure of Barry Lyndon, Kubrick didn't stop. Instead, he stepped boldly into a new genre, adapting Stephen King's chilling novel into a vision that would redefine horror forever.
Whatever movies Stanley made, what I love about his work is they are completely conscious. You may like them, you may not like them. You know, everybody pretty much acknowledges he's the man. I still feel that underrates him.
With The Shining, Kubrick brought horror to new heights. The story of a family isolated in a haunted hotel became an exploration of madness and the darkness within.
I got to see it 4 times because of commitments one place and another. And there are an awful lot of things about that movie that I think are flawless and beautiful and just marvelous. And then there are other times when I feel as though I'd given Stanley Kubrick a live grenade and he heroically threw his body on it.
I'm asking about The Shining, you know, it's unusual. He says, well, in reality, this is an optimistic picture. In some way, this movie's about ghosts. Anything that says there's anything after death is an optimistic story.
There are still images in The Shining that I wake up screaming about. That little boy in the hall.
Little boy on the bicycle. The sense of movement that gave that picture inside this very, very foreboding place.
The Shining, over the years, gained recognition as one of the greatest horror films of all time. Kubrick's use of space, sound, and silence turned the Overlook into a character of its own, a place of terror that remains unmatched in cinematic horror.
Platoon! Hold! I am Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, your drill instructor. And the first and last words out of your filthy sewers will be, sir. Sir, yes, sir! If you survive recruit training, you will be a weapon. You will be a minister of death, praying for war.
In Full Metal Jacket, Kubrick dissected the dehumanizing machine of war. From the brutality of basic training to the senseless violence on the battlefield, he painted a harrowing picture of conflict and loss.
The most important thing about the movies is the obvious, that it shows what it was like, what had happened.
The only film that's ever done that, to give you a real idea of what it's like and also what the kids have got to go through.
You know, in the boot camp sequences, it shows you how they stripped the Marine down, how they made him nothing. They cut off his hair. They gave him absolutely nothing but grief the whole time to kind of strip him down and build him into a soldier, a killing machine, really.
And also the nature of the tragedy of it.
When I've seen the movie, I've watched the audience. To see them be affected by it is really moving. It's really nice.
Although not a commercial blockbuster, Full Metal Jacket was praised for its unflinching portrayal of the horrors of war and the psychological toll it takes on soldiers. For Kubrick, war was not about glory, but about survival and the destruction of innocence. The last dance for Stanley Kubrick was Eyes Wide Shut. A deeply personal project, this film was the culmination of his lifelong exploration of human relationships, secrecy, and desire.
It was a theme that we both talked about a great deal, thought about it in many different ways. It used to come back over the years again and again. And as you see friends getting divorced and remarried, and the topic would come up again. And it had so many variations and so much really serious thought to it that he knew one day he was going to make it.
The essential thing about Kubrick is his absolute obsession with every single detail, how small and how detailed it is. And it was his inability to ever say he was finished until he got precisely and exactly what he wanted.
In a way, perhaps the most extraordinary example of how a piece of music is used to drive home something about character and story and atmosphere of a film is in Eyes Wide Shut.
For Stanley Kubrick, Eyes Wide Shut was more than a film. It was the final chapter in a career that constantly redefined cinema. His last masterpiece left audiences with questions, just as he always intended. Kubrick completed the final cut of the film just days before his death, leaving behind a project that felt like his own enigmatic farewell. The haunting atmosphere of Eyes Wide Shut was a fitting end to a career defined by mystery and brilliance.
He didn't ever like the fact that he made so few films. Always wished he could have done more. If he had anything negative in his life, I think it was that feeling that he was slow.
You say, well, gee, I wish he'd made more, but these were enough because there's so much in each one.
Stanley was always a man who never wanted to repeat himself.
We have a conversation I had with Steven Spielberg about what was the most difficult and challenging thing about directing a film. He thought the most difficult and challenging thing about directing a film was getting out of the car. I'm sure you all know the feeling. But at the same time, anyone who has ever been privileged to direct a film also knows that although it can be like trying to write War and Peace in a bumper car in an amusement park, when you finally get it right, there are not many joys in life that can equal the feeling.
He was different to any other director I'd worked with before, and he's different to any other director that I've worked with since.
A great work of art, whether it's a novel or a painting or a composition or a sculpture or a film, is that it doesn't disappear. And his films do not disappear.
There's nothing real about any of those movies that he made, but they're hypnotic. I can't say that I liked Clockwork Orange. I was uncomfortable the whole time I was watching it, but it was hypnotic.
There'll never be another Stanley Kubrick. His legacy will live forever, I think.
I think he was the premier filmmaker of the 20th century.
Kubrick's work continues to inspire, challenging filmmakers and audiences alike to see beyond the screen and question what lies beneath. From science fiction to psychological horror, Kubrick pushed boundaries, reshaping cinema with every project. Stanley Kubrick was more than a director. He was an architect of the human experience, capturing our fears, desires, and dreams in a way no one else could. In every frame, Stanley Kubrick left a piece of himself, a mystery, a question, an invitation to look closer. His work was his life, his art, his legacy. And though he may be gone, his vision lives on, forever etched into the fabric of cinema. This is Eternal Visionary, and until next time, keep dreaming, keep believing.